Chapter 12. Difficulties in Abundance. Although the period of boycott, which lasted for 3 years, meant that a large section of the Meccan population endured great hardship, it was not without some benefit to Islam. For one thing, it ensured that newcomers would belong only to that breed of people who support the truth regardless of what they may have to endure as a result. Despite the boycott, new recruits to Islam continued to trickle through, albeit on a very limited scale. They were, however, of the caliber no ideology can do without. Another benefit of the boycott could be seen in the way it was ended. The suffering of the Hashemites moved the kind-hearted among the unbelievers to take action in defiance of the hardliners like Abu Jahl. This caused disarray in the ranks of the unbelievers. Moreover, the hardliners appeared in a bad light, since they opposed an act of kindness to their kinsfolk. Furthermore, the boycott was a period of relative lull in the conflict between the Muslims and the unbelievers. There was little contact between the two parties. Therefore, many of the Quraysh personalities had time to reflect on Islam, the message of the Prophet contained in the Quran. To them, the Quran was something wonderful. It spoke so powerfully that they could not turn away when it was recited. The hardliners who continued to hold sway felt that they must do something to stop the general public listening to the Quran. Everyone was told that they should not listen to the Quran when they heard it. Instead, they should raise their voices so as not to hear it. This is not much different from dictatorial regimes jamming other nations' radio stations to keep their populations ignorant of what is taking place elsewhere, or indeed of oppression in their own countries. But the Quran had its attraction even to the most outspoken enemies of Islam. They realized that Muhammad, peace be upon him, spent some time every night in worship reading the Quran in prayer. Therefore, protected by the cover of darkness, some of them just sat outside his house, listening to the Quran being recited inside. Every one of them was on his own, thinking that no one would know about his action. One can only assume that the motivation was either to try to judge the message of Muhammad, peace be upon him, objectively, or to learn the truth about it, or to listen to the superb literary style of the Quran. As the day began to break, each one of them went back so that no one could find out about his action. Soon, the three of them, Abu Jahl himself, Abu Sufyan, and Al-Akhnas ibn Sharik, met. There was no need to ask each other what they were doing. There was only one reason for their presence there at that particular time. Therefore, they counseled each other against such action. "Should some of your followers see you," one of them said, "you would stir doubts in their minds." The following night, they did the same, and once again they met at the break of day. Again, they counseled each other against their irresponsible action. Nevertheless, the third night, each of them went to sit outside the Prophet's home and listen to the Quran. When they met in the morning, they felt ashamed of themselves. One of them suggested that they should give each other their word of honor not to come again. They did so before going home. Later that morning, Al-Akhnas ibn Sharik went to see Abu Sufyan in his home. He asked him what he thought about what he heard Muhammad, peace be upon him, reciting. Abu Sufyan said, "I heard things which I know and recognize to be true, but I also heard things whose nature I cannot understand." Al-Akhnas said that he felt the same. He then left and went to Abu Jahl's home to put the same question to him. Abu Jahl's answer was totally different. For once, he was candid and honest with himself and his interlocutor. "I will tell you about what I heard. We have competed with the clan of Abd Manaf for honors. They fed the poor, and we did the same. They provided generous support to those who needed it, and we did the same. When we were together on the same level, like two racehorses running neck and neck, they said that one of their number was a prophet receiving revelations from on high. When can we attain such an honor? By God, we shall never believe in him." Last-minute negotiations. Shortly after that, Abu Talib, the Prophet's protector, was taken ill. He was an old man, over 70 years of age. It was clear that his illness would be terminal. The Quraysh leaders conferred among themselves on what the death of Abu Talib might signify in their relations with his nephew, Muhammad, peace be upon him, the Prophet of Islam. They said to each other, "Ever since Hamza and Umar became Muslims, the strength of Islam has continued to grow. Now, Muhammad's followers, peace be upon him, come from all clans of the Quraysh. Let us go to Abu Talib so that he may work out some sort of accommodation between us and his nephew." Who could guarantee that they would not try to take power in this city of ours? A strong delegation, including the most distinguished among them, such as Utbah, Shayba, Abu Jahl, Umayyah ibn Khalaf, and Abu Sufyan, went to Abu Talib, inquiring after his health. They then said to him, "You know how distinguished your position is among us, and how much we respect you. In your present condition, we candidly say that we fear the worst for you. You are aware of the strained relations between your nephew and ourselves. We suggest that you call him and let both him and us give you some form of pledges so that each party will leave the other alone and we establish a peaceful relationship between him and us." Superficially, this was a very innocent approach. The Quraysh seemed to offer a fair deal which guaranteed freedom for both sides. The fact was, they wanted nothing less than a complete cessation of the new message. The Prophet should no longer speak about God's oneness. This is clear in the ensuing dialogue between the two sides. Abu Talib called the Prophet and said to him, "These are the leaders of your people. They have asked to see you for an arrangement of give and take." Addressing the delegation, the Prophet said, "I asked of you only one word. Should you give me that, your authority over all the Arabs will be strengthened. The non-Arabs will also submit to you." Thinking that this signified a shift in the Prophet's position, Abu Jahl said, "Yes, indeed, we will give you that, and 10 words like it. What is it you ask of us?" Was this a blank check Abu Jahl was offering to the Prophet? It seemed so, but Abu Jahl was not of the compromising type. God's messenger, the advocate of truth, and the herald of every good thing, put his request clearly. "You declare that you believe in the oneness of God and renounce the worship of any deity beside him." He wanted nothing for himself, no wealth, position, honor, or authority. He wanted everything for his message. He required them to abandon all deities other than God, be they made of stone or of flesh and blood. The Quraysh delegation understood clearly what Muhammad, peace be upon him, wanted. They clapped in disapproval. One of them said, "Do you, Muhammad, peace be upon him, want to have only one God instead of all these deities? That is very strange indeed." Recognizing that there was no possibility of a compromise, the delegation left in disappointment. When they had gone, Abu Talib said to the Prophet, "My nephew, I do not think you asked them too much." Encouraged by this remark, the Prophet said, "Then you, uncle, say that word. It will benefit you on the Day of Judgment." Abu Talib said, "If it was not for fear that you and your clan would be abused after I had gone, and for fear that the Quraysh would think I said it because I was afraid of death, I would have certainly said it to please you." One report suggests that Al-Abbas, Abu Talib's brother, noticed his lips moving just before he died. He stooped to listen, then he raised his head and confirmed to the Prophet that Abu Talib made that declaration which would have included him among the Muslims. In reply, the Prophet said, "I have heard nothing. It is simply not known whether Abu Talib was a Muslim when he died." The Prophet was very sad to lose his uncle. Abu Talib was the man who brought up Muhammad, peace be upon him, the orphan who had lost both his parents and his grandfather by the time he was 8 years old. He took him into his family and treated him like his own son, giving him extra kindness out of sympathy for the bereaved child. When Muhammad, peace be upon him, grew up, Abu Talib recognized that he had a nephew of great standing, combining strength of character with high moral standards and refined manners. Moreover, Abu Talib was the protector of Muhammad, peace be upon him, the Prophet of Islam, when he needed protection. His loss meant a great deal to the Prophet. After Abu Talib's death, the irresponsible characters of the Quraysh started abusing the Prophet with word and deed. Tragedy strikes again. Within 5 weeks of Abu Talib's death, the Prophet suffered another great loss. His loving wife Khadija died. Reports are not very clear who of the two died first, but their deaths came in quick succession. To Muhammad, peace be upon him, Khadija was a kind, loving wife who cared deeply for her husband and for his mission. With her, he found all the comfort a man expects of an understanding wife. She shared with him all his feelings and worries. She had known his worth ever since she had proposed marriage to him. When he received his message, she was the first to believe in it. From that day on, she was his main supporter. No matter what problems he met outside, he was certain of finding comfort in his home. Her departure meant that he could no longer find the compassion with which she comforted him after the many disappointments he received from the Quraysh. In other words, the Prophet lost his internal and external support within a very brief period of time. He was now more vulnerable to the Quraysh's attacks. In later years, recalling memories of this period, the Prophet said, "The Quraysh could not cause me much harm until Abu Talib died. Once Abu Talib departed from the scene, the Prophet had to bear an increasing degree of the Quraysh's persecution. One day, an idiot stopped the Prophet and threw dust over his head. Some of the Quraysh leaders were delighted to see the Prophet being publicly humiliated. He went home with dust on his head. One of his daughters went up to him to clean his head, tears pouring down her cheeks. He comforted her, saying, 'Do not cry, young daughter. God will protect your father.'" In an authentic hadith, Muslim relates on the authority of Abdullah ibn Masud, "God's messenger was once praying at the Kaaba, while Abu Jahl sat with a few of his friends not far away. Some camels had been slaughtered the day before. Abu Jahl came up with a devilish suggestion, saying to his friends, 'Which of you would be prepared to take the stomach of the camel slaughtered yesterday and put it on Muhammad's back, peace be upon him, when he prostrates himself?' One of them did just that, while the rest of them laughed. I was standing by, feeling my powerlessness that I could not even take that dirt off the Prophet's back. The Prophet continued in his prostration, unable to lift his head, until someone went to tell his daughter, Fatima, who was just a young girl. She came and took it off his back. She went to those people of the Quraysh and abused them. When the Prophet finished his prayer, he raised his head to the sky and uttered a little prayer. 'My Lord, I appeal to you against the Quraysh.' He said this 3 times. When they heard him saying this prayer, they stopped laughing and felt afraid. He then said, 'My Lord, I appeal to you against Abu Jahl ibn Hisham, Utbah ibn Rabi'a, Shayba ibn Rabi'a, and Al-Walid ibn Utbah, Umayyah ibn Khalaf, Uqba ibn Abu Mu'ayth.' And he mentioned a 7th person whose name slips my mind. 'By God, who sent Muhammad, peace be upon him, with the message of the truth, I saw all those he named killed at Badr. They were buried there in the well, which served as a mass grave for the unbelievers who died at Badr.' Some of the Prophet's neighbors were tempted to cause him whatever harm they could. When his family wanted to cook something for him, they put animal dirt in his cooking pan. The Prophet took that off with a stick, stood on his own doorstep, and called to his clan, 'You children of Abd Manaf, what sort of neighborly kindness is this?' He then threw the dirt away. Worse was still to come, for it appeared that the death of Abu Talib meant that the Hashemites' resolve to protect the Prophet became considerably weaker. With memories still fresh in their minds of the hard times they had just gone through when they were boycotted by the Quraysh, and with Abu Lahab, the Prophet's own uncle, joining the rest of the Quraysh in their stiff opposition, the Hashemites were keenly aware of the high price they were paying for their protection of Muhammad, peace be upon him. Like the rest of the Quraysh clans, the majority of the Hashemites were still holding to their pagan beliefs. Hence, it was not surprising that many of them decided to cut their losses and withhold their support. which they had previously extended to Muhammad, peace be upon him, on grounds of tribal loyalty. The trip to Taif. This new situation meant that the Prophet had to explore new avenues in his search for support. After long deliberation, he set out on foot for Taif, a mountainous town about 110 kilometers from Mecca. His only companion on this trip was his faithful servant, Zayd ibn Haritha. Taif was populated by the Thaqif, the second largest tribe in Arabia. As he began his journey, Muhammad, peace be upon him, was full of hope. If the Thaqif would respond favorably to the call of Islam, that would signify a new, happier phase in the history of the divine message. Once at Taif, the Prophet approached its leading personalities, explaining his message and calling on them to believe in God and to support him in his efforts to establish the Islamic code of living. Taif was the town where the major idol Allat had its temple. The Thaqif had tried to give Allat a special status and to make its temple one to be visited by other Arabs, on a similar footing to the Kaaba. The Thaqif were fully aware of what the Prophet advocated. Its leaders had similar considerations to those of the Quraysh in determining their attitude to the Prophet. For 10 days, the Prophet spoke to one chief after another. None gave him a word of encouragement. The worst response came from 3 brothers, the sons of Amr ibn Umair. These 3 brothers, Abd Yalil, Masud, and Habib, were the recognized leaders of Taif. One of them was married to a Qurayshi woman, and the Prophet hoped that this relationship would work in his favor. In the event, the 3 men were extremely rude in their rejection of the Prophet's approach. The first one said, "I would tear the robes of the Kaaba if it was true that God has chosen you as his messenger." The second said, "Has God found no one other than you to be his messenger?" The third said, "By God, I will never speak to you. If it is true that you are God's messenger, you are too great for me to speak to you. If, on the other hand, you are lying, you are not worth answering." Fearing that the news of their rejection would serve to intensify the Quraysh's hostility to Islam, the Prophet requested the Thaqif notables not to publicize his mission. They refused him even that. Instead, they set on him a crowd of their teenagers and servants who chased and stoned him. His feet were soon bleeding, and he was in a very sorry state. Zayd tried hard to defend him and protect him from the stones. The Prophet then sought refuge in an orchard which belonged to 2 brothers from Mecca. They were in their orchard, and they saw Muhammad, peace be upon him, when he entered. At first, they watched him quietly, but he did not see them. As the Prophet sat down, he said this highly emotional and touching prayer. "To you, my Lord, I complain of my weakness, lack of support, and the humiliation I am made to receive. Most compassionate and most merciful, you are the Lord of the weak, and you are my Lord. To whom do you leave me? To a distant person who receives me with hostility, or to an enemy to whom you have given power over me? If you are not displeased with me, I do not care what I face. I would, however, be much happier with your mercy. I seek refuge in the light of your face, by which all darkness is dispelled, and both this life and the life to come are put on their right courses against incurring your wrath or being the subject of your anger. To you I submit until I earn your pleasure. Everything is powerless without your support." The owners of the orchard were none other than Utbah and Sheba, the 2 sons of Rabi'a, who commanded positions of high esteem in the Quraysh. Although the 2 brothers were opposed to Islam and to Muhammad, peace be upon him, they felt sorry for him in his unenviable plight. Therefore, they called a servant of theirs named Adas and told him to take a bunch of grapes on a plate to Muhammad, peace be upon him. Adas, who was a Christian from the Iraqi town of Nineveh, complied. As the Prophet took the grapes, he said, as Muslims do before eating, "In the name of God." Surprised, Adas said, "This is something no one in these areas says." When Adas answered the Prophet's question about his religion and place of origin, the Prophet commented, "Then you come from the same place as the noble divine Jonah." Even more surprised, Adas asked, How did you know about Jonah? When I left Nineveh, not even 10 people knew anything about him. The Prophet said, he was my brother. Like me, he was a prophet. Adas then kissed the Prophet's head, hands, and feet in a gesture of genuine love and respect. As they watched, one of the 2 owners of the orchard said to his brother, "That man has certainly spoilt your slave." When Adas joined them, they asked him the reason for his very respectful attitude to Muhammad, peace be upon him. He said, "There can be no one on earth better than him. He has indeed told me something which no one but a prophet would know." They said, "You should be careful, Adas. He may try to convert you while your religion is better than his." It is clear from their attitude that although they might be kind to the Prophet in a situation which aroused their nobler feelings of pity and compassion, they begrudged him even the slightest gain from his unsuccessful trip. Adas did not follow his master's religion. Their opinion of Christianity was not at all flattering. Yet, they would rather have their slave sticking to it than following Muhammad, peace be upon him, so that the Islamic camp might remain weak. In this, the 2 Meccan chiefs were no different from others who have taken a stand of opposition to Islam throughout history. Even the slightest gain Islam achieves pains them. The long journey back home. The Prophet then set out on his journey back to Mecca. He stopped at Nakhla, not very far from Mecca. Considering the situation he was in from all angles, he realized that the Quraysh might prevent him from entering Mecca again. Worse, they might kill him or have him locked up. There was only one way out: to seek the protection of one of their notables. The nature of Arabian tribal society was such that any individual coming into a town or a tribe needed to have an alliance with or protection from a man of good standing in that town or tribe. Normally, people of such standing would extend their protection to anyone who sought it, because by doing so they enhanced their own standing and reputation. In the case of the Prophet, however, the first 2 people his messenger approached, Al-Akhnas ibn Sharik and Suhail ibn Amr, declined. The third, Al-Mutim ibn Adi, responded favorably. He and his children and nephews took up their arms and went to the mosque. He then sent word to the Prophet to enter. The Prophet came up to the mosque and walked round it 7 times, guarded by his protectors. Abu Jahl, dismayed at the loss of this chance of putting an end to Muhammad, peace be upon him, asked Al-Mutim, "Are you a follower or a protector?" Al-Mutim confirmed that he was only protecting Muhammad, peace be upon him. Abu Jahl then declared that there would be no intervention to threaten such protection. The Prophet then went home safely. He had learned, however, a very important lesson: that he must not venture outside Mecca before first completing the necessary groundwork which ensured a good reception for his message and his own safety. This disappointing trip to Taif had a profound effect on the Prophet. He was deeply hurt by the hostility of some of those Thaqif leaders. Several years later, Aisha, his wife, asked the Prophet after the defeat suffered by the Muslims in Uhud, their second major battle against the Quraysh, "Have you ever gone through a day harder than that of Uhud?" He replied, "I have suffered a great deal from your people, but the worst I have been through was on the day of Al-Aqaba. I offered myself to Abd Yalil ibn Abd Kalal, but he rejected my offer. I left him in a very depressed mood, and I did not come to myself until I reached Gan al-Talib. I raised my head to find a cloud over me. I looked up and saw Gabriel, peace be upon him, speaking to me. God has heard what reply your people gave you, and he has sent you the angel in charge of the mountains to carry out your orders. The angel of the mountains greeted me. God has heard what your people said in reply to you, and he has sent me to you to be at your service. If you wish, I will bring the mountains over their heads, and if you wish, I will cause the earth to swallow them." I said to him, "No, I hope that God will bring out from their offspring people who worship him alone and associate no partners with him." When the Prophet re-entered Mecca after his disappointing journey to Taif, he must have felt that he was in a very dire situation. Within the same year, he had lost his loving wife and his uncle, who afforded him unwavering support. His attempt to compensate for this dual loss with outside support not only failed to win him anything, but also compelled him to seek the protection of Al-Mutim, a Quraysh notable who did not believe in Islam. Muhammad, peace be upon him, was now fully aware that he could no longer rely on his own clan, the Hashemites, for any measure of firm support. He felt himself alone in the whole world. His few followers were no match for the forces opposing him, yet he firmly believed in the truth of the message he was preaching. His faith in God did not waver. Comfort on the way. At this point, something unusual happened to him. One night, as the Prophet was asleep in the home of his cousin Hani bint Abi Talib in Mecca, the angel Gabriel came and woke him up and took him by the hand to the mosque, where he found an animal smaller than a mule but slightly bigger than a donkey. The animal, which was a quadruped, also had 2 wings and floated easily as he moved with unimaginable speed. The Prophet's own description of his movement was that he put his foot at the furthest point to his side. Together, the Prophet and Gabriel rode the animal, which was called Al-Buraq, a name derived from Barq, meaning lightning. In no time at all, they reached Jerusalem in Palestine. There, the Prophet met Abraham, Moses, Jesus, peace be upon them, and other noble prophets. He led them all in prayer. He was then brought 3 cups. One contained milk, another contained wine, and the third contained water. He drank the milk. When he had finished, Gabriel said, "You and your nation are rightly guided." When they had finished their business in Jerusalem, they flew up to heaven. The Prophet tells us that as they entered each of the 7 heavens, Gabriel would confirm to its guardian angel that Muhammad, peace be upon him, had already received his mission. In each heaven, he met one or other of the prophets who preached the message of God's oneness to mankind. Among those mentioned in the authentic accounts of this very special journey were Adam, Jesus, John, Joseph, Moses, and Abraham, peace be upon them. He also saw examples of the suffering which would be endured by certain groups of people as they would be condemned to hell in the hereafter. The description of these groups and their suffering is so vivid that one can almost see them in their plight. Yet the suffering was so horrible that one would do anything to escape it. The Prophet was then admitted into paradise and saw examples of the happiness to be enjoyed by those who would seek God's pleasure and do His bidding. Here, the Prophet was delighted with what he saw and expressed his wish that all his followers would be able to partake of such enjoyments. While he was in paradise, he was informed of the obligatory prayers he and his followers were expected to offer. As he passed Moses on his way back, Moses, peace be upon him, asked him about this particular point of prayer. When Muhammad, peace be upon him, informed him that Muslims would be required to pray 50 times each day, Moses, peace be upon him, counseled him to go back and pray God to reduce this requirement. Commenting, "Prayers constitute a heavy burden and your nation is weak." The Prophet acted on this advice and God reduced this obligation to 40 prayers each day. When he stopped by Moses, peace be upon him again, Moses repeated the same advice. Again, the Prophet acted on it. The whole procedure was repeated several times until the obligatory prayers for Muslims were reduced to 5 daily. Moses still thought, peace be upon him, they were hard to observe and counseled the Prophet to request a further reduction. The Prophet, however, felt too shy to do that. The Prophet then returned to Mecca, having been absent only for part of the night. He returned just before dawn. On this unique trip, he witnessed the expanse of the universe, as well as the link between our life in this world and the greater and larger life of the other world. God also wanted him to see other signs and symbols which filled his blessed heart with unshakable faith. Since he was taken on that unique journey from the house of his cousin Hani, where he was staying that night, it was to her house that he returned. Everyone in the house soon woke up. When they had finished their dawn prayers, the Prophet told Hani about his journey. A firm believer, she accepted what the Prophet related as true. When he was about to leave, intending to go to the mosque, she stopped him saying, "I fear that people would not believe you if you tell them what you have just told me." The Prophet made clear his intention to tell them, even though they would not believe me. When he was sitting in the mosque, He was totally absorbed in his thoughts. Abu Jahl, the arch-enemy of Islam, noticed that and came up to him to ask, "Any news?" The Prophet replied, "Yes, I was taken last night to Jerusalem." Making sure that he had heard him correctly, Abu Jahl asked, "To Jerusalem?" The Prophet's clear answer came in the affirmative. Realizing that there was a chance to consolidate the opposition to Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his message, Abu Jahl asked him, "If I call the others to come over, would you repeat to them what you have just told me?" Unhesitatingly, the Prophet said, "Yes." Thus, Abu Jahl did what the Prophet intended to do. That is, to gather the people so that he would tell them about his journey. When the Prophet had finished his story, everybody was expressing disbelief in one way or another. Some people clapped, some put their hands over their heads, and others jeered. One of them asked about the caravan the Quraysh had sent to Syria. The Prophet gave a detailed answer on its conditions and specified its arrival time. They went out at the appointed time, and to their surprise, there was the caravan in exactly the same condition the Prophet had described. Yet, that did not influence or weaken their opposition to the Prophet. As the Prophet's account of his journey was completed, there were many unbelievers going round into every quarter in Mecca to relate what sounded to them the most incredible story ever told. Some of them went straight to Abu Bakr, the Prophet's closest friend, to tell him and to find out what his reaction would be. Abu Bakr first accused them of bringing him false stories. When they assured him that Muhammad, peace be upon him, actually claimed to have made the return journey to Jerusalem overnight, Abu Bakr's answer was, "If he has actually said this, he is telling the truth." When they expressed their amazement that he would believe such a singular story, Abu Bakr said, "What is so surprising? I believe him when he says something even more incomprehensible. He says he receives revelations from God, and I believe him." Abu Bakr then went to the mosque where people were still gathered around the Prophet expressing their disbelief. He asked the Prophet whether he made the statement that he went to Jerusalem and came back on the same night. When he heard the Prophet's affirmative reply, Abu Bakr said, "I believe you. You always tell the truth." Then he asked the Prophet to describe Jerusalem. As the Prophet went on with his description, Abu Bakr kept repeating his words, "I believe you. You always tell the truth." The Prophet was so pleased with Abu Bakr that he gave him the title Siddiq, which denotes a true and firm believer. This was Abu Bakr's most cherished title, which he kept for the rest of his life. A small number of people rejoined the unbelievers after accepting Islam. The Prophet, however, was not influenced by their apostasy. He continued to preach his message with unshaken determination. Direct confrontation with adversity. 2 points need to be made here. The first concerns the example provided by the Prophet for all advocates of Islam. He faced the Quraysh with his story, fully aware that he would be accused of telling lies. That did not influence his determination to do what was required of him. The interests of his message came first. People's accusations could not weaken his resolve. The point is that people may accept the idea of revelations but turn away from Islam for lesser reasons. In this case, they found it difficult to accept the idea that God could take his messenger on a journey like this while they believed that he would inspire him with his words, sending down his angel messenger to convey his message. In other cases, people may opt for disbelief for even less important reasons. That, however, should not weaken our resolve to follow in the footsteps of the Prophet and his noble companions. There is no doubt that the night journey was a very effective morale booster for the Prophet. He was, after all, a human being who shared in all human emotions of sorrow, grief, pleasure, and delight. Only a short time earlier, he had lost his wife Khadija, who was his main source of comfort, and his uncle Abu Talib, who ensured that Muhammad, peace be upon him, received all the support and protection to which he was entitled according to the traditions of the Arabian society. Then came that disappointing trip to Taif, which was intended to broaden the base of the Islamic message. It is only natural that Muhammad, peace be upon him, should feel downhearted after those 3 major jolts which affected both his personal and his public life. There was no question that his sorrow would affect his faith. Nevertheless, his losses were, by human standards, of huge proportions. Hence, a comforting gesture which gave him first-hand experience of the smallness of this world in relation to the wider universe and the triviality of what one may experience in this life in relation to what lies in store in the next life would, as the expression goes, do him the world of good. There is no doubt that his night journey had a lasting effect on the Prophet. It boosted his confidence in himself and in his message. It enhanced his aspirations and helped put his efforts in the service of his faith on a higher level. Subsequent events show that there was a marked change in his attempts to set the course for his message. Universality of the Islamic message. The night journey was of great significance in more ways than one. Note, for example, that at Jerusalem, Muhammad, peace be upon him, led the other prophets in prayer. It is a well-established Islamic concept that the messages of all prophets were basically the same. They all called on mankind to believe in God, the one and only deity. With Islam, these messages were brought to their full and complete form. With Muhammad, peace be upon him, the line of prophethood reached its end. For the prophets to pray together at Jerusalem signifies the continuity of their messages and their unity of rank and purpose. Jerusalem thus occupies a unique position as a sacred place for all followers of the divine religions. That unique prayer of the prophets, led by Muhammad, peace be upon him, also signifies that as Islam has crowned all divine messages and brought them to their final form, Jerusalem, the spot revered by all religions, belongs to the Muslims who follow Muhammad, peace be upon him, the recognized leader of all prophets. The night journey also stresses the universality of the Islamic message. Muhammad, peace be upon him, is taken to Jerusalem, which, at the time, was inhabited by non-Arabs. He is engaged there in the most religious of human activities before he is taken to heaven. It would have been just as easy for God to raise Muhammad, peace be upon him, to heaven from his home in Mecca. The fact that he chose to take him to Jerusalem first to lead his fellow prophets in prayer endorses the fact that Islam is a message for mankind, not for the Arabs alone. In those congregational prayers of the prophets, one also sees a reference to the fact that all the distortion which crept into earlier messages had been pushed aside. A fuller and more complete version of these messages has been revealed and guaranteed by God to remain intact for the rest of time. That version is Islam. Was it a physical journey? Muhammad's night journey, peace be upon him, from Mecca to Jerusalem and hence to heaven, and his return to his hometown on the same night, was to a contemporary mind very much a miracle. Caravans took a whole month to cover the distance between the two cities. How, then, could Muhammad, peace be upon him, make a return journey overnight and have a side excursion to heaven in the same package? Even to those accustomed to today's jet travel and to the notion of supersonic speed, the event can only be classified as supernatural. Hence, questions have always been raised about the true aim of this journey and its nature. More precisely, people wonder whether it was a spiritual or physical journey. The Quran answers the first question clearly. The surah entitled The Night Journey, or Al-Isra, opens with this verse. Limitless in his glory is he who made his servant go by night from the sacred temple of Mecca to the further temple of Jerusalem, whose surroundings we have blessed, that we might show him some of our signs. He alone hears all and sees all. 17:1. The whole object of the journey, then, was that the Prophet would have a chance to see some of God's signs. What these were, we are not told. Seeing them, however, had a greatly reassuring effect on Muhammad, peace be upon him, since it enabled him to experience at first hand the limitless ability of God the Creator. This was bound to put the dispute in which he had been engaged with the Meccans into perspective. It exhibited before his eyes the true nature and the real might of the two camps, his own, in which God is an active participant, and that of the unbelievers. Hence, it is not surprising that the following years of his life were free of any feelings of weakness or downheartedness. He remained to the last day of his life unaffected by adversity, certain that he would be victorious as long as he and his followers were true believers, sincere in their intentions and actions. Here one should emphasize that the journey was not a miracle with the aim of persuading the unbelievers to accept the faith. It was not one of the type of miracles which was given to other prophets as evidence of their truthfulness. The unbelievers had actually challenged the prophet to go up into heaven, but he refused their challenge, as he refused all their other challenging requests. His answer to all such requests was, "Glory be to my Lord. I am only a human messenger." 1793. When he actually rose to heaven, he did not portray the fact as a reply for their challenge. Hence, one needs to understand the night journey in its proper light. It was merely an act of God to reassure his messenger at a time when such a reassurance was needed for the proper conveyance of his message. The majority of Islamic scholars are of the opinion that the night journey was not purely spiritual. They believe, as does the present author, that the prophet did physically, in body and spirit, go on this journey. Some people may find this hard to believe because it involves preternatural powers. The answer is that whatever powers such a journey required, they were easy for God to provide. Look back only 100 years and imagine what would have been the reaction of people if someone had told them that anyone would be able to travel the distance between Bahrain and London in a little over 4 hours in luxurious comfort. Now reflect on traveling speeds. If one maintains the rate of progress achieved in this field in the present century, would supersonic traveling have seemed natural? Indeed, the term natural is certainly relative. What is natural today was preternatural to our ancestors and may become, in our grandchildren's view, primitive. Natural, in essence, signifies little more than familiar. One need only look with open eyes and mind at the world to find that there are many miraculous facts which are readily accepted as natural for no reason other than their familiarity. Every childbirth is a miracle, but it is simply overlooked because it occurs so often. One need only reflect over it a little to understand its miraculous nature. In tackling such events as the night journey, one needs to remember only that they occur because God has willed that they should occur. To him, there is no such thing as natural or preternatural. He has created all the laws of nature, whether they are familiar or not. To him, the operation of all laws is equally easy. What is not understood of his actions is readily accepted, because the fact that his power is limitless is already accepted.